I want you to picture a winter street in Minneapolis. Cold, icy, ordinary, and then gunfire from a federal agent, a 37-year-old mother, a U.S. citizen, dead. I'm Fareed Zakaria. And what happened to Renee Nicole Good is not just a tragedy. It is a warning. For years, Americans were told a simple story, that harsher immigration enforcement would make the rest of us safer, that cruelty directed at others would somehow stop at the border of our own lives. But reality has a way of breaking political myths, and this week it did so violently. Protests erupted not just in Minneapolis, but across cities thousands of miles away, because people understood something instinctively. When state power becomes reckless, no community is insulated. If this story unsettles you, it should. Stay with me, share this conversation if you believe these questions matter. Because before we can understand the outrage, we have to understand the problem itself and how America arrived at this moment. What exactly is the issue Americans are confronting right now? This is not only about immigration, and it is not only about one shooting in Minneapolis. It is about the expanding reach of federal power and the shrinking space for accountability. Renee Nicole Good was not an abstraction. She was a mother, a citizen, someone living an ordinary life. Her death exposed a deeper contradiction at the heart of the Trump administration's immigration strategy. A policy sold as protection has become a source of fear. An enforcement system designed for borders is now embedded in neighborhoods, streets, and daily life. Across the country, people are responding not because they share the same politics, but because they recognize the same risk. When armed federal agents patrol civilian communities, when lethal force is justified after the fact, and when leaders respond by smearing the dead rather than questioning the system, something fundamental shifts. This moment forces a hard question. Who is enforcement really protecting, and at what cost? To answer that, we have to step back and examine how this system was built and why it was allowed to grow this powerful. To understand how we arrived here, we need to talk about escalation not overnight, but over time. Immigration enforcement did not suddenly become visible on city streets. It expanded quietly, justified by fear, normalized by repetition. The language changed first. Immigrants were no longer neighbors or workers, but threats. Then the mission changed. What was once about borders began to seep inward into communities far from any crossing. Over the past year, the Trump administration framed this expansion as a public good. Crackdowns, we were told, would restore order, make neighborhoods safer, protect real Americans. But that promise rested on a dangerous assumption, that violence, once unleashed, could be neatly contained. It never is. When enforcement operates through demonization, it creates permission structures, moral shortcuts that make excess not just possible, but predictable. And when those excesses occur, institutions often respond not with restraint, but with defense. That is the cycle America is now confronting. And it helps explain why one killing did not stay local, why it ignited something far larger and far more volatile. What happened in Minneapolis was the moment that cycle detonated, an ICE officer fired, a woman fell, and in seconds, the abstract became unbearable real. Renee Nicole Good was killed in broad daylight on icy streets in a city far from any border. The shock was immediate, but what followed mattered just as much. Instead of restraint, there was escalation. Federal agents continued patrolling. Communities were told to stand down, even as fear spread. And then came the official response, not sorrow, not accountability, but deflection. Vice President J.D. Vance spent 35 minutes attacking the dead woman's reputation. The Homeland Security Secretary labeled her a domestic terrorist. The administration reposted the video of her killing, again and again. This was not damage control. It was a signal. When the state responds to a killing by smearing the victim, it tells its agents they will be protected. And it tells the public that the narrative matters more than the truth. If this troubles you, you're not alone. Pay attention, because moments like this reveal how power really works. And beneath this crisis lies a deeper system, one designed to shield itself when things go wrong. What we are seeing is not chaos. It is a system behaving exactly as designed. Modern immigration enforcement operates through insulation. Agents on the ground are separated from public oversight. Decisions are justified by broad labels, threat, terrorist, risk, that are difficult to challenge once deployed. And responsibility moves upward, away from the moment violence occurs. This is how power protects itself. When enforcement agencies expand into everyday life, they also expand their discretion. And when discretion widens without corresponding accountability, force becomes easier to use and harder to question. The aftermath follows a familiar script. Officials close ranks, redefine the victim, and shift the conversation from actions to identities. In this framework, the question is no longer what happened, but who the person was alleged to be. That shift is crucial. It turns a killing into a debate, and a debate into paralysis. This mechanism doesn't require malice. It requires only repetition. Over time, it becomes normal. And once it does, the next crisis is never an accident, it's an inevitability waiting to surface. The second rupture did not come from gunfire. It came from the response across the country. People watched the video. Not once, but repeatedly reposted by officials, defended by leaders, reframed as justification. And something snapped. Protests spread faster than explanations. Minneapolis became the center, but not the limit. ICE agents continued patrolling as demonstrations grew. Communities faced a surreal duality: peaceful crowds on frozen streets and armed federal officers moving through neighborhoods. This was no longer about one death. It was about whether dissent itself would be treated as a threat. The administration doubled down, the language hardened, critics were accused of lying, the press was attacked for asking questions. In moments like this, governments reveal their priorities not through policy, but through posture. Tension builds when people feel unheard. It explodes when they feel mocked. This is why the streets filled. Not with chaos, but with clarity. A recognition that the crisis was no longer hidden inside the system, it was unfolding in public view. Now let me bring this closer to you, because this is where systems stop being abstract and start touching real lives. If you are a parent, you understand the fear immediately. You imagine leaving your home and not returning. If you are a citizen, you feel the ground shift beneath a promise you were told was solid. And if you are simply a human being, you recognize the quiet terror of knowing that armed power can enter ordinary life without warning. You watch officials dismiss outrage. You hear a mother reduced to a label. And you ask yourself a question you never thought you'd have to ask. Could this happen to me? This is how trust erodes. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Communities pull inward. People hesitate before speaking. Safety becomes conditional. If this resonates with you, don't look away. Conversations like this matter. Share them. Talk about them. Because silence is what allows fear to harden into policy. And as Americans wrestle with this moment at home, the consequences don't stop at the border. They ripple outward. What happens inside America never stays inside America for long. Around the world, U.S. power has always rested on more than force. It has rested on credibility, the idea that the rule of law restrains the state, that citizens are protected from arbitrary violence, that accountability ultimately matters. When that image fractures, the effects travel fast. Allies watch closely. So do rivals. When federal agents kill a U.S. citizen and leaders respond by defending the act and attacking the victim, it weakens America's moral authority to speak about human rights elsewhere. It becomes harder to criticize abuses abroad when similar patterns appear at home. There is also a practical consequence. Immigration policy does not exist in isolation. It shapes diplomacy, cross-border cooperation, and global perceptions of stability. A country that appears internally volatile sends a signal of unpredictability outward. This is how domestic decisions become geopolitical facts. The protests, the rhetoric, the images circulating online, they form a narrative that others will use. And once that narrative takes hold, it is difficult to control. Which brings us to the most important question of all. Where does this lead from here? History rarely moves in straight lines. It branches. And from this moment, I see three possible paths ahead. The first is reform. Public pressure forces transparency. Oversight tightens. Enforcement powers are narrowed. And accountability becomes real again. In this scenario, the system corrects itself not because leaders choose to, but because society demands it. This is the most hopeful path. It requires vigilance and memory. The second path is normalization. Outrage fades. The language stays harsh. Patrols continue. Each incident is treated as isolated, unfortunate, but necessary. Over time, people adapt. Fear becomes background noise. This is how democracies erode, not with collapse, but with fatigue. The third path is escalation. Power hardens. Dissent is framed as disorder. More force is justified in the name of stability. In this future, the exception becomes the rule. And once that line is crossed, returning is painfully difficult. None of these outcomes is inevitable. They depend on choices by leaders, institutions, and by you watching this now. Because the future is not predicted, it is produced. And that brings us to what this moment ultimately asks of us. This story does not end with one name, but it begins with remembering it. Renee Nicole Good was not a symbol when she woke up that morning. She became one because a system failed to see her as fully human and then refused to admit that failure. That is the danger America is facing right now. Not disagreement, not protest, but a slow moral numbness where power explains itself instead of examining itself. I've spent my career studying how societies change. And here is the truth. Democracies don't fall when people shout. They weaken when people stop caring who gets hurt, as long as it isn't them. You, watching this, still have a choice. To pay attention, to question narratives, to refuse easy answers that demand silence in exchange for order. If this analysis helped you see the system more clearly, don't let it stop here. Share it. Continue the conversation. Demand better. Because the most dangerous moment for any society is when injustice becomes routine. And the next chapter of this story is already being written by what we choose to tolerate and what we refuse to accept.